They gave me a legal envelope on my birthday. It came with no cake, no hugs, just signatures. I stepped inside the house with my coat still damp from the drizzle outside, shaking off the cold and the quiet from my walk up the stone pathway. Thanksgiving dinner smells drifted faintly from the kitchen. Rosemary, roasted turkey, that sugary glaze my mother insisted on for her pecan pie. But they didn't reach the living room where everyone was already seated. I was late just by a few minutes, but enough that no one rose to greet me, not even a glance. My father, Harold, poured red wine into tall crystal glasses like he was serving at some executive board meeting, his expression unreadable as ever. Lorraine, my mother, sat at the head of the table with her signature scarf tied neatly under her chin, smiling tightly at Felicity's story about meeting a fitness brand CEO last week in Portland. Felicity looked radiant in a red velvet dress, her voice animated as she recounted her social media milestones. 50,000 followers, a podcast deal pending. There was no empty seat left between them. Mine was tucked at the end of the table, next to a high-backed chair no one used anymore, as if someone had died. I slid into it wordlessly, brushing off the folded napkin with embroidered leaves, and forced a smile. "Sorry I'm late," I said, soft enough not to interrupt Felicity. No one answered. As Felicity launched into another story, this time about a photo shoot at the coast, Lorraine leaned over, adjusted a fork on my plate, and placed a white envelope in front of me with surgical precision. I stared at it, puzzled. No one else had one. There were no wrapped presents, no candles, no hint of birthday acknowledgement, only the envelope. Lorraine's voice remained neutral. "You should read that before we serve dessert." I reached for it, heart thudding like it already knew. The seal was crisp, not handwritten like a card, but official looking, with a printed return address and a notary stamp on the back. My fingers trembled slightly as I peeled it open. The paper inside was thick and the words were precise. "This document formally terminates familial obligation, legal recognition, and financial connection." I read the lines twice before understanding them. I looked up, and they were all still watching Felicity like nothing had happened. "What is this?" I asked, voice shaking. Harold finally turned toward me, swirling the wine in his glass. "It's nothing personal, Clara. You're independent now. We've decided to invest our time and resources where they'll matter most. Vanity metrics and product endorsements?" I said before I could stop myself. Lorraine didn't flinch. "Felicity has vision. She has a future. You chose a small life. That's your right, of course." Felicity shrugged, glancing at her phone. "I didn't ask for this, Clara. I mean—" I cut her off with a breath and looked back down. The document went on to list an amount, $285,000, labeled as child rearing and education reimbursement. There was a due date 30 days out. A line stating that from this day forward, I would not be welcome at family functions or receive future support. My stomach turned, not with anger, not yet, just disbelief. The kind of disbelief that settles in your bones because you always suspected something was fragile, and now it finally breaks, and somehow you're still surprised. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Is this supposed to be a joke?" Lorraine stood, smoothing her blouse. "Of course not. It's a legal courtesy. After all, we paid for years of private school, your college housing. Think of it as closing the ledger." My hands were cold. I looked at Felicity, waiting for some hint of discomfort, but she just shifted her gaze away and sipped her wine. "I've been financially independent since 23, I said quietly. "I pay my own bills. I've never asked you for a dime." Harold shrugged. "Then it shouldn't be hard to settle." I stood up, my chair scraping gently against the polished floor. For a moment, I thought I'd scream, or cry, or demand they look at me, really look. But there was nothing left in me to give them. The envelope was still in my hand when I reached for my coat. "I see," I said, voice even. "Well, happy Thanksgiving." The air outside was freezing, but for the first time that night I could breathe. Clifton Ames never said much, but when he did, it was always exactly what I needed to hear. The morning after I left my parents' house, I woke earlier than usual. My apartment felt colder than it should have, despite the heater clicking on and off all night. I made tea, black, no sugar, and stared out the window at the patchy frost clinging to the lawn. Across the yard, just over the wooden fence that separated my building from the house next door, Mr. Ames's porch light still glowed, a soft amber hue in the fog. I'd lived next to him for nearly 8 years. We didn't speak often, but when we did, it was never small talk. He didn't care about how many books I shelved at the library or how many plants I had in my window box. He asked about the people behind the stories I read, about what made me stay in Eugene all these years. I bundled up and stepped outside, carrying 2 scones I'd picked up from the bakery on 7th. They were still warm, wrapped in a paper bag, smelling faintly of cranberry and nutmeg. I knocked on the side gate gently and waited. "Come around front," came his familiar voice, faint but clear. He was sitting on his porch in a thick flannel robe and knit cap, a steaming mug balanced on his knee. His dog-eared paperback was closed beside him. His silver beard looked a bit more unkempt than usual, and his eyes scanned me as if he already knew something had shifted. "Rough night?" he asked without accusation. I handed him the scones and sat down across from him. "You could say that." He didn't press. We sipped our drinks in silence, the kind that's comfortable with someone who doesn't need to fill the air. After a few minutes, he nodded toward the little gash on my thumb where I'd torn open the envelope too hastily. "Paper cut?" he said, almost with a smirk. "Legal documents," I replied. "Birthday present from my parents." He didn't react much, just sipped his tea, eyes steady. Families don't always know what gifts are. There was a long pause after that. A breeze rustled through the cedar branches behind us, and somewhere down the street I could hear the faint sound of a garbage truck groaning its way around the neighborhood. "I don't think I belong to them anymore," I said softly. Mr. Ames nodded slowly. "Maybe not. Maybe that's not a loss." His words landed heavier than expected. I swallowed hard, blinking against the gray light of morning. "You know," he added, "I always thought you had more sense than to measure your worth by the ones who never saw it." I looked at him, really looked. There were stories in the lines on his face and the way he held his mug like it might fall apart if he gripped too hard. "I used to think something was wrong with me," I said, "for not fitting into that world." "There's nothing wrong with you, Clara," he said firmly. "They just didn't recognize the kind of rare you are." I blinked quickly, staring down at the porch railing. Without another word, Mr. Ames reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small wooden box, worn at the edges but polished smooth. He placed it gently on the table between us. "I've had this ready for a while," he said. "It's not for today, not yet." I touched the lid gently but didn't open it. "What is it?" He looked me in the eye. "Something you'll need when the time is right." I didn't ask for more. I knew better with Mr. Ames. If he said I'd know, then I would. We sat there for a while longer. He told me a story I'd never heard before, about a trip he took with his late wife to the Oregon coast in the 70s, how she made him a picnic of canned peaches and sharp cheddar, how they danced barefoot on the sand. His voice grew distant with memory, and I saw something fragile pass behind his eyes. Eventually, the wind picked up, and he said he'd better head inside. I stood too, holding the box in both hands like it might shatter. At the door, I turned to look back at him. "You've always looked out for me," I said. "You make it easy," he replied. That afternoon, I placed the box on my mantel. I didn't touch it again. I didn't open it, not yet. But somehow, I already felt a little less alone. 3 days later, the phone rang. I didn't need to pick it up to know something was gone. It was early, just past 7, and I was cataloging a box of donated books in the back of the library when I heard the faint buzz from my coat pocket. I paused mid-sentence in a log sheet, stared at the name glowing on my screen, Law Office of Joseph Harlan. I didn't recognize the name, but something in me stirred, an unease that wrapped around my chest before I could even answer. "Miss Mitchell." The voice was low, formal, but not unkind. "This is Joseph Harlan. I'm Mr. Clifton Ames's attorney." I didn't respond right away, a breath caught in my throat. "I'm very sorry to inform you," he continued, "Mr. Ames passed away last night, peacefully in his sleep." I sank slowly onto the step stool beside the cart of books. The room spun quietly around me, but my face stayed still. "He left instructions," the man added gently. "You're listed as the primary beneficiary in his will. There's a private letter he wrote for you as well. My fingers curled into the fabric of my coat. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Do I need to come in? I managed. If you're available, he said. I'll be at the church office near 10th and Ivy this afternoon. That's where the arrangements are being handled. After the call ended, I just sat there. The barcode scanner blinked lazily on the desk behind me, waiting for a book that would never be scanned. I didn't cry. Not then. I went through the motions, clocked out early, walked to the church under a pale December sky, hands tucked into my sleeves. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and wood smoke. It was the kind of day that made the air feel like a memory. The funeral was small, just 7 people, an older couple who'd once been his neighbors, a woman from the bank, and a man I vaguely recognized as the town barber. No eulogies, no slideshow, just a few hymns played quietly on the piano, and silence so thick I could hear the radiator hum beneath the floorboards. Janelle arrived halfway through. She slipped into the pew beside me without saying a word and placed a small tissue pack in my lap. After the service, Mr. Harlan met me in a side room, dimly lit with dark paneling and a desk that looked older than both of us. He handed me a folder, neatly labeled with my name. There's a signed copy of the will. He left you his home, a small investment account, and... He paused, then reached into a side drawer. And this. He placed a folded envelope and a worn leather-bound book onto the table. The envelope had my name on it, written in Mr. Ames's tidy cursive. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and something else. His pipe, maybe, or time. I opened the letter slowly. Inside, there was no grand explanation, just a handful of lines that felt like they'd waited years to be said. Clara, you made this world gentler for me. I hope in some small way I did the same for you. This house is yours now, not because I had no one else, but because no one else ever asked how I was. Don't look for approval from those who never knew your worth. You are enough, always were. C.A. The tears came then, quietly, as I ran my fingers over the ink like it could bring him back. The book he left behind was a diary, full of pressed leaves, old photographs, newspaper clippings, notes he'd made about things we'd talked about, books I'd mentioned, movies I said I liked, even my preference for plain black tea. On the final page, taped carefully, was a legal record of a scholarship fund, the Quiet Light Fund, established 3 years ago in my name, though I'd never known it existed. The house transfer was already in progress. I signed the necessary documents with hands that barely stopped shaking. Back at home, I placed the envelope and the book on my coffee table. The wooden box he'd given me 3 days before still sat on the mantel, untouched. That night, I lit a candle beside it. I opened the box. Inside was a small silver key and a folded letter with my name in his handwriting. They gave me papers to walk away. I brought papers to remind them who really left. It had been a quiet week since the funeral. I'd moved into Mr. Ames's home slowly, deliberately, one box at a time. I kept his teacups on the shelf, his old records in the cabinet, even his slippers by the door. Not because I couldn't bear to let go, but because somehow they belonged as much to the house as the windows or walls did. And maybe, if I admitted it, I liked knowing a part of him stayed. The silver key he left fit the drawer beneath his writing desk. Inside was a folder filled with letters, some never mailed, others carefully addressed but yellowed with age. The last one had my name in ink that had begun to fade. It was that letter I carried with me now, tucked inside the same type of white envelope my parents once used to sever ties. I parked across the street from their house just after 10. The morning was unusually bright for December, sky clear, frost still crusted along the tips of the grass. I wore my old gray coat and a wool scarf Mr. Ames once complimented, something about sensible people dressing like the season matters. The house looked the same brick walkway, same wreath on the door that Lorraine put up each year, wrapped in ivory ribbon instead of red like most folks. I rang the bell once and waited. Lorraine opened the door a few moments later, hair pinned precisely, perfume strong. Her surprise was visible, though quickly masked. "Clara," she said, glancing past me as if expecting someone else. "I'm not staying long," I said calmly. Inside, the living room was as polished as always, clean, cold, and lined with furniture no one used. Felicity sat curled on the arm of a leather chair, flipping through her phone, her legs tucked neatly beneath her. Harold walked in with a mug of coffee, paused mid-step. "This is a surprise," he said flatly. I didn't sit. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the coffee table. "This is from someone who remembered who I am." Harold raised an eyebrow but didn't touch it. "It's a letter from Clifton Ames," I added. "He passed last week, left me at his home, and his words." Lorraine's mouth tightened. "Why are you bringing that here?" I took a breath. "Because you once gave me papers that said I was no longer part of this family, and I thought, maybe you deserve to know what family looks like from someone who had no reason to offer it." Harold crossed his arms. "You came here to shame us?" "No," I said. "I came to close the circle." Felicity stirred for the first time. "What's in the letter?" she asked quietly. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Just the truth. That someone saw me, not for what I earned or how I looked or what I could provide, but for who I am." Silence stretched. "I used to think I had to fight to belong here," I said, voice steady. "But it turns out I didn't have to fight. I just had to stop trying." I picked up my bag and turned toward the door. Lorraine remained still, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles whitened. Felicity followed me out. She wore no shoes, just thick socks on the cold steps. "I didn't know," she said, eyes lowered. "I really didn't." It wasn't the inheritance that mattered. It was the legacy. The old floorboards of Mr. Ames's house creaked differently than the ones in my apartment. They weren't uneven or broken, just seasoned, like they carried the memory of every step he'd ever taken. I walked those boards every morning now, tracing paths he'd probably worn down over years, from kitchen to porch, from study to hallway. I imagined him padding through before sunrise, holding a cup of tea and thinking through his next letter. I'd left most of the furniture as it was. His big desk remained by the window, his books still shelved by subject. But the front room, what had once been filled with dust and unused chairs, was changing. I added a long oak table, brought in folding chairs from the thrift store. I tacked up a cork board on one wall and pinned a single sheet to the center with the heading, "Quiet Light Fund, Applications Open." Janelle had helped me set it up. She'd come by with a thermos of coffee and a tin of cinnamon rolls, looked around and said, "This feels more like a beginning than an end." I nodded, but said nothing. I was still learning how to carry beginnings. We'd worked together on the application forms, mostly simple questions: who you were, what you needed, what you dreamed of. We kept the barriers low, no essays, no grades, just honesty. The first applicant was Maya. She came into the library one afternoon when I was on shift, cradling a backpack that looked far too heavy for her frame. She stood at the desk with her shoulders hunched and asked if she could speak to Ms. Clara, like I was someone official. "I heard you have something for kids like me," she said. "Not money, just something that helps." We sat in the reading room, tucked between two old shelves of poetry. She told me her parents had thrown her out after she dropped out of community college to pursue acting. "They called it a waste," she said. "Told me to come back when I was ready to be useful." Her voice cracked when she said it, but she didn't cry. I handed her a paper form and watched her hands shake slightly as she wrote her name. Later that evening, I lit a fire in the living room, curled up with Mr. Ames's old blanket, and read her application. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. "I want to be something good. I just need one person to believe I can." I circled the word approved and slid the folder into the stack marked ready. By the end of the week, 3 more applications came in, quiet ones, from a boy who wanted to open a small bike repair stand, from a woman starting over after a divorce, from someone who signed only as E. They weren't grand dreams, but they were real, and every one of them felt like a seed, like the kind of thing Mr. Ames would have planted without telling anyone. On Friday, I baked my first pecan pie. Janelle swore she'd help, but then spent most of the time talking while I figured out crusts and proportions. The pie came out a little overbaked around the edges, but it smelled right. That night, we had a soft opening for the Quiet Light Fund. Just neighbors, a few friends from the library, and a handful of people who'd seen the flyer at the diner. We served pie and coffee in mismatched mugs. We played Billie Holiday from the old record player Mr. Ames had kept in the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Toward the end, Maya stood up awkwardly and said thank you. That was all. Just those two words. And yet, the way she said them, like they were the first she'd spoken aloud in weeks, made my throat catch. Across the room, by the window, Felicity stood. She wasn't dressed in her usual sleek jacket and boots, just a cardigan and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. I hadn't invited her. I didn't think she'd come, but there she was, hands folded, watching. When the room cleared out, I walked over to her. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I recognized the paper instantly, same type my parents had used months ago, but this one was crumpled slightly at the edges, folded and unfolded. I kept it, she said. The bill they gave you, the one for raising you. I didn't touch it. I tore it up, she added, her voice low. Took me too long, but I did. I nodded. It's not the money, Fel. It's the silence that hurts most. She blinked, then looked away. I know. For a moment we stood there, two women in the house of a man who had believed in both of us, whether we knew it or not. Felicity, can I come help with the decorations? Last year I waited for a seat at their table. This year I made my own. It was Christmas Eve and snow had been falling since morning, light like sifted flour, clinging gently to rooftops and branches. I woke before sunrise and lit the fire in the old brick hearth, one log at a time, until the living room smelled like cedar and ash. The house was quiet except for the creaking of wood and the soft rustle of wind at the windows. I had set the table the night before, not because I expected anyone to be impressed, but because it mattered to me. A long wooden table, no tablecloth, just polished wood. Each place setting had a mismatched plate, a cloth napkin folded by hand, and beside every plate a small card that simply read, "You belong." The stockings hung above the mantel were small, just 6 of them, knit by a woman from the community center who insisted on giving them to whoever's doing that good-hearted fun thing. Names were written in the black marker: Maya, Janelle, Felicity, Carl, Rosa, me. That morning, Janelle came early, carrying a pie still warm from the oven. She set it down with a huff and looked around the room. Smells like comfort, she said, then added with a wink, and wood smoke, but mostly comfort. Carl and Rosa arrived next, he with a bag of cookies, she with a tin of spiced nuts. They were regulars at the library, though I'd never known their names until the quiet light fund gave us a reason to talk. And then Felicity came. She wasn't late, but she lingered outside, a minute longer than she needed to, standing in the snow with gloved hands clasped together. When I opened the door, she gave me a look that was half apology, half hope. I bought cider, she said, holding up a thermos. I didn't know what else to do. It's perfect, I told her, and it was. Dinner was simple: pot roast in the slow cooker, garlic rolls, a salad that wilted a little too soon, but no one cared. People laughed softly, asked questions, and listened. Maya recited a poem. Janelle told a story about getting lost on Christmas Eve in a snowstorm with her grandmother. And Felicity, my sister, stood and spoke in a voice smaller than I remembered. I never understood Clara, she said. I thought she chose to be small, quiet, invisible. But now I realized she was never small. She just didn't need to be loud to matter. The room went still. I didn't know whether to speak or cry or just breathe, so I raised my glass. To those who stayed when they didn't have to those we choose every day. They echoed me softly. We clink our glasses and drink. After dinner, we passed around old carols printed on faded song sheets Mr. Ames had left in a box labeled "Four Better Decembers." Janelle played a few notes on the piano, and for the first time in many winters, the house felt alive. Later that night, as the others helped clean up, I slipped away to the mantel. I reached for the last envelope in Mr. Ames's box, the one he had marked with a single sentence: "For when you're no longer looking for family." I didn't open it, not yet. I just held it to my chest and looked around the room. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere deep inside, I felt chosen too. There was no grand speech, no applause, just the quiet clinking of mugs and a warmth that lingered long after the snow began to fall. In that stillness, I realized I hadn't just built a table, I had built a place where people felt seen. Sometimes kindness comes in small gestures, a letter, a shared meal, a name remembered. We don't always know what people carry, but we can choose to meet them with softness, not suspicion. Like a porch light left on at the end of a long road, compassion doesn't need to be loud to guide someone home. If this story has stirred something in you, perhaps take a moment today to leave a light on for someone else who might need it.